So now it's time to talk about effects in the DAW, which is a really complex and potentially powerful way to transform the audio on your tracks in pretty much any way you can imagine. So in this video, we're going to talk about effects in general, and in the next ones after this, we'll talk about specific effects and how they work. But in this video, we're going to focus on kind of the model for how effects work in the DAW. The difference between effects on individual tracks and effects on a master track. And we'll talk about plugins and plugin formats for effects. And then we'll talk about how to modify effect parameters and how to modify those parameters over time through envelopes and how to automate those changes. But let's start with the notion of effects themselves and how they work in a DAW. The model, or the analogy that I like to use a lot is to guitar effects pedals, like the ones in this picture. So a guitar effects pedal will have an audio input, so you plug your guitar into the input of the effect, and then it'll do something to change that sound, and then it'll send that transformed audio out of the output of the effect. And you can also chain these together if you want, so you have one pedal's output going to the input of the next, the output of that pedal going to the input of the next, and so on and so on and so forth. So you can think about this as this source filter approach, and I mean filter in a very general sense here, as anything that can transform sound. So what we have essentially is we have some audio source. In this case, this would be our track, the audio coming from the track. And then that is going into our effect, which is transforming it somehow. And then that is creating the output that we actually hear or that gets routed to another effect. So you can imagine a chain would look more like this, where we would have our source, our track, going to our first effect, then the output of that going to the second, and then going to the third, and so on and so forth, and then eventually going to the output. What the effect does is really anything you can imagine. It could be distortion, it could be reverb, it could be changing the volume or the panning of the sound. It's a very general notion of somehow transforming that sound. So we're going to go ahead and do this very briefly in Reaper so that you can see how this works. And I have a simple track here with a sound on it. And I want to add an effect to it. So I'm going to hit this FX button on the track, like that. And this opens up an effects dialog box. Now, there's a lot of different places to look for effects here. I'm going to go ahead and click on JS. This is a bunch of effects that are included with Reaper for now. And I want to add distortion to this track. So I'm going to actually just do a search here. I'm going to start typing in the word distortion, and it should show up here, guitar distortion. And then I will either double click on that or hit the OK button, and this gets added to my effects chain. So essentially, the audio from the track goes here, and then the output of this either goes to the next effect down the list, or if it's the last one, as it is here, then it goes out to what I actually hear. So then I can hit a play button here, and we hear all that distortion that's been added to the track. That's how you add effects in Reaper. If you wanted to add another one at this point, then I could hit the add button, and I would be able to add another one to my chain, and on and on. So effects, just like a guitar pedal, usually has a bunch of knobs on it, and the pedal itself that you can push down on to control how it's transforming the sound. Effects have their own parameters. And the parameters are basically the different knobs and sliders and things that control exactly how that effect is transforming the sound. So the parameters are obviously different for every single effect. That's why we're going to talk about different effects on a case-by-case basis in the next few videos. But then if we want to change the values of those parameters over time, that's when we create envelopes. And this is what an envelope looks like in Reaper. Essentially something that's taking some effect parameter and changing its value over time, gradually from one value to another. And we can draw those manually, And then we can also control them using something called a low-frequency oscillator, taking something like a sine wave to have it vary the parameter back and forth over and over again. We can also record them in real time as we're actually moving the slider physically ourselves. So I want to show you how all these things work, the parameters, how these envelopes work, and how we can manipulate them. So I'm going to come back to Reaper, where I've added my distortion effect. My parameters are right over here. So the most important one for distortion is gain. So if I play this in a loop and I turn the gain back down to 0, I actually end up with the original sound. And as I increase this, I get more and more distortion. I can also choose to bypass the effect. If I just uncheck this box here, then the effect goes off. And if I check it again, it'll come back on. So that's fine if I want to set the distortion to a particular level and I want it to stay at that level for the entire track. But if I want to do something more complex, to actually change the amount of distortion at different points in my music, then I need to create an envelope to change that value gradually over time. So if I go over here to this little button here next to the word trim, and I click on it, then I get to configure what envelopes I want to create for the track. And you can see that down here it says guitar distortion. It shows me all the different things that I can do. These correspond basically to all the different parameters of this effect. So I'm going to hit gain, because that's the one that I was playing with by moving that slider. I'm going to close up this dialog box for the moment. And now you can see it created this extra kind of area here where I can edit this value. And so if I hold down the Apple key on Mac or the Control key on Windows, my cursor turns into a pencil, and I can actually draw, kind of freeform, whatever kind of envelope I want. So if I want to have it gradually increase my distortion over these couple measures, I can do that. I missed one little dot at the beginning. If I click on that, you see how this turns into arrows pointing in all directions. I can just kind of drag that wherever I want to fix that value. I better zoom in a little bit here so I can actually see it a little bit better. So I'm going to come over here where I can actually see this, and then I can move it down. And it looks like I missed one more point there. I can move that down. I'll go ahead and zoom out again so you can see the whole file. And then we can hear how this is changing. And in fact, if I opened up the effects dialog box again, you'll actually see that slider moving as that envelope is playing back. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and clear this and get rid of what I just drew by clicking this little button here and going clear envelope. And yes, I want to get rid of it. So I want to show you a few other ways that I can do a similar thing. So I'm going to add this back in. And this time, I don't want to draw all the points. I just want to draw a few points. So I'm going to draw a point here. And then I'll click away from it. And then I'll draw another point here. I'll click away from it. Draw another point there. And I'll click away from it. So the way envelopes work is that it's not just a kind of free-form drawing, but you can actually create a bunch of different points and then create these ramps that go from one to another. So if I want a really smooth linear ramp, I don't really need to draw all those points freeform. I can just define my starting point and my ending point and say, well, I want you to go linearly from the start to the finish. And then I get a kind of more precise effect. So that's another thing that I can do. I'm going to clear that again. And I'm going to add this back in again. Because another thing that we can do is do something called, in fact, I'm going to do something crazy here. I'm going to actually draw this onto the Reaper window so you can see the term here. The LFO, which stands for low frequency oscillator. And what an LFO does is it's some basic kind of waveform, usually a sine wave or a sawtooth wave or something like that, that, as you may recall from Module 1, when we get below that range of human hearing, we start hearing those cycles of the waveform as rhythm rather than as pitch. And that's exactly what the LFO is taking advantage of. It's using this to create a periodic change in an envelope that we hear rhythmically. And so what I can do here is I can click on this little button that looks like it's a picture of a sine wave here. And then I can hit LFO here. And this will not actually show up visually in the GUI, so it won't show up as a purple line here. But I can see it going up and down here, because I picked a sine wave here. And I can either set a tempo in hertz, so 1 cycle per second like that, or I can sync it to the tempo of my project and define this in terms of beats. So I can say I want it going back and forth every 1 beat, for instance. And then I can play this, and you'll hear the distortion coming in and out. To have it go at a slower tempo, maybe every 4 beats instead of every beat. And then I get that very periodic thing that this LFO is creating, which might have been very hard to draw back and forth in the envelope, very easy to control precisely with the LFO. The final thing that's available to me is that I can actually record this in real time as I'm listening to the track play back. And so, I'm sorry, I meant to actually clear that here. So I'm going to add this back one more time. I'm going to click on my gain, and I'm going to come back here and look at automation mode. And I'm going to set this to write mode. And see, when I set that to write mode, all of a sudden, this slider here to control the gain has gotten a red background to show that I'm recording that. And now this is a little bit non-intuitive here, but I'm not actually going to turn off my looping here so I don't record over the same thing a bunch of times. And so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to start off at 0 because that's the value I'm going to start off at, and then I want to gradually increase it. So I'm going to hit play. And you can see that all the things I moved on that slider now have come back. And now that I'm done with that, I need to come back and say that I'm no longer in write mode, but I'm going back to read mode. And then when I play this back, my automation will play. So as you can see, there are a lot of different ways to create these envelopes through drawing them, controlling them by these different points with ramps between them, recording them by moving a slider, or using LFOs to control them. One final note I'll say is that you don't always have to just move a slider on the screen if you're recording. As we'll see in the next module when we talk about MIDI, you can actually map this slider to a MIDI controller. So it might be a knob on a keyboard or some external hardware device that you can move around that will then make this move up and down, which might give you a little bit more precise control than using a mouse to click and drag it. So a couple other things I want to talk about here. One is the master track versus individual tracks. So far, we've been inserting effects onto just a single track in Reaper. So those effects are only affecting the audio on that single track. But there might be times when you want to insert an effect that will affect the audio on all of your tracks. And you don't want to go through setting up and configuring and enveloping it individually on each track, because that would be a real waste of time. And so instead you can put it on the master track. And so to show the master track in Reaper, let me go ahead and get rid of this envelope one more time here. I simply go to the View menu and say Master Track. And then you see we get this extra track at the top. It's not one I can record audio onto directly, but it has an effects button there. And so if I add an effect to that track, it's going to process a mix of the audio from all of my other tracks in my document. So if you wanted to do some final mastering, like dynamic compression, like we'll talk about in a couple videos from now, or equalization, or things like that, or add some reverb or something like that to everything going on, the master track is the most appropriate place to do it. Before we wrap up this discussion, is one other thing that's really important for me to explain, which is that most plugins are not specific to a single DAW program. Like in some other types of programs, there are standard plugin formats, and developers create plugins that will run across a bunch of DAWs. So I want to review a few of the most popular formats for plugins that you're likely to come across. VST is one of the oldest formats for audio plugins and also one of the most popular. It's cross-platform. It runs on a Mac and on Windows, and pretty much almost every DAW out there supports VST plugins. VST stands for Virtual Studio Technology. AU is a Mac-only one that Apple created. It stands for Audio Unit, and it only runs on the Mac, but pretty much every DAW program on the Mac supports audio units. Likewise, DX is a DirectX format developed by Microsoft, only available on Windows, but many DAWs on Windows support that. And then you come across a lot of more esoteric plugin formats as well. I'm going to mention just one because we use it a lot in this course, which is JS. It's a plugin format that's native to Reaper, and they include 100 or 200 plugins with Reaper that are in this JS format. JS actually stands for Jesus Sonic. Don't ask me why that was what they tried to call it. You can ask them. But that is what JS stands for. It doesn't stand for JavaScript or something like that. It's its own particular format for encoding audio plugins. And if you go into Reaper and you click on that FX tab and you want to add an effect, they're sorted by different types. So you see your VSTs are here. I'm on a Mac, so my audio units are showing up here. The JS ones are here. Some Cocos VST plugins are shown in a separate area for some reason, but these are all actually also VST plugins that are bundled with Reaper. And then another thing that's important to know is that there's VSTi and AUI. These are instruments that make sound in response to MIDI messages rather than effects that process audio on tracks. So we'll discuss these in more detail in Module 3 when we talk about MIDI sequencing. So I know this has been a long video here, but I think we covered a lot of the important details about effects and how they work in the DAW. Just to review quickly, we talked about how to add effects to a track or a master track. We talked about all the different ways that we can control the parameters of effects and automate those through envelopes over time. And we talked about some of the major plugin formats and how to access them inside of Reaper. In the next videos, we're going to talk about some specific effects and how they work and how you might want to use them.